The reality check sponsored by Leaders with Vision. On your table, you will find white cards to fill out your questions. If you know what the questions are that you brought with you, go ahead and fill them out now so that we're ready to ask the questions immediately after our presenters finish. Each of our presenters will have 6 minutes. John, are you going to be the timekeeper?
No.
You're going to have to be the timekeeper. Stuart's not here. She's in Texas.
That's what I volunteered for, yes.
Okay. We invite all of y'all, if you're not already a member, to join Leaders with Vision. We will be changing our fiscal year to July 1 through June 30th, and anyone who has paid their dues will be so prorated. So expect to hear from us very shortly. We find that the summer is going to be the time when we can get some of that paperwork done that we never have time to do during session and during the election season. Now, this fall, we will be hosting candidate forums, both on the Senate and the congressional level, and others as we can work them into our schedule. So watch for that. Our next lunch with leaders will be the third Thursday in August. And members, look for a member social on the weekend of Labor Day. It's a great kickoff for the election season, and we're going to have a barbecue. So sign up for membership now. Well, now that we're here and we're presumably safe, the legislators have gone home, and now we only have to worry about one person, the governor, and what he signs into law. We are going to ask these very fine experts to tell us what they think and review the legislative session. And we were going to start with the Secretary to the Senate, Glenn Kapp. Glenn?
That didn't work. Got to hold it, huh?
Yep.
Thank you, Gene. Well, we had a rather interesting session, starting with the state budget. All $24.6 billion of it. Our state budget this time was reduced by about 3.2%. And one of the interesting things, we authorized 1,000 less state employees. Last year, the way we balanced the budget is we made cuts, quote unquote, in what is called the preamble, or the front of the state budget. And basically, we just gave the governor the authority to do whatever he needed to do across the board to balance the budget. Everybody went home. They had put put money in a number of programs that they thought were extremely important, elderly programs, various programs, and found out later that the governor cut them off, which certainly upset them. I think that for the Senate's part, when they came back this time, they were determined that they were not going to allow that to happen again. It is the legislature's responsibility to balance the budget. As you know, the state, through the governor, has hired a company out of New York to do an evaluation of all of state government and come up with efficiencies in state government and come up ways that we can do things to cut our spending. And they have found ways to cut a lot of spending, I think a total of somewhere around $75 million. When we finally got to the final stages of the budget, we were still short about 68 million. What the Senate did and the House adopted was we went in and took those efficiencies, and we gave the governor. He wanted the efficiencies done, so he can cut specifically within state departments what those efficiencies are, instead of having the carte blanche across the board. So that's how we ended up balancing it. One of the things that they came with efficiencies that they said we needed to do was close down numerous of our offices across the state for renewal of your driver's license. And that didn't go over very well, certainly in the rural areas. That was something that was canned and taken off the board, so your driver's license is, all of those little local driver's license offices will remain open. That was taken off but we did get it balanced. Part of it was we did put in $4.4 million for state police raises that they haven't had in a couple of years, and we did add $26.5 million in the budget to allow for state employees performance-based raises, so that will be there. The delinquency tax amnesty program, we extended it for another year. It in 2014 still has 100% credit for your interest, and I think it's 50% on penalties. And in 2015, that's a reduction. I think it's somewhere around 33% in your interest, and maybe 50% in penalties for 15. And there's a provision in there that we can't do it again until 2025. So, but they did extend that tax delinquency. Minimum foundation program, we put $3.6 billion in. It's an increase. It's the first time we've redone it in about 5 years. It's an increase of 2.75%. It comes to a total of some $3,961 per student in the state, and that's an increase from $3,800. Health care, as you know, we refused to expand eligibility for Medicaid under the Affordable Health Care Act, but we created a thing called the Louisiana First, America Next Freedom and Empowerment Plan. It's kind of an interesting plan because the governor came up with this America Next plan, and he presented it all over when he was running, and he talked about all the wonderful things he was going to do. Hopefully, I guess, when he became governor, it was to expand health care, to lower costs and improve health care for health care outcomes. And what we did in the Senate, and it passed the House, was pick up that plan. We adopted it as a legislative plan, and we gave it back to him, and we gave the Department of Health the opportunity to come up with his plan and to implement it by September, I believe. Supposedly it's going to be cost effective, and it's going to be a wonderful thing that the governor's come up with, so we've given him the opportunity to do that. We allow the sale of alcoholic beverages in movie theaters. We changed the terminology of incest, and one of the things we found in the crime of incest is when someone is charged with incest, immediately you know that someone in that family, and it kind of the victim gets highlighted real quick. So you won't see the crime of incest anymore. It'll be crime against nature. Took all that out and changed it, hopefully to protect the innocent more. Oh, I don't have much time left. I'll jump real quick to legacy lawsuits. We tried to clarify some of the legacy lawsuit stuff. There was a big fight, and codified some of the court decisions in legacy lawsuits of what the penalties would be. We did that. The coastal restoration lawsuit, protection lawsuit, that was a real big one, and I know it's been a controversy for a long time about the lawsuit that's going on with the Flood Protection Authority out of New Orleans, and basically we passed legislation that kills that. We had an equal pay bill that LAB promoted. That equal pay bill basically codified the federal equal pay law. Elections, we did approve the authority to create an independent party. You can't just go down and sign up as independent. You got to have enough people to become an independent party, but now you can call yourself an independent party. Any recall elections, we did provide for recall elections, that if you're recalled, you can't rerun in that office. Many of you remember the controversy across the river in Port Allen, and that kind of prompted all that. So if you get recalled, you can't immediately run back in that position. And one of the things, believe it or not, was highly important to a lot of people, didn't get a lot of press, but we changed the law to provide that service dogs can be used by service individuals that have either traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress syndrome. So I'll quit there. I guess I run out of time.
Thank you, Glenn. And our next report will be from the House and from the clerk of the House, Butch Spears.
Thank you, Gene. Good afternoon. All of those things that Glenn just talked about were things that the Senate accomplished. I don't have to talk for 6 minutes about what the House did. Mostly what the House didn't do would take me the rest of the afternoon to talk about. But those issues that were important to House members that we didn't do are numerous. I created a tracking list of 39 separate bills that were, quote, hot topics in the House. Some of those were also Senate bills, and the legislature passed 9 of those 39 bills, 4 of which were House bills, 5 were Senate bills. One of the hot topics was whether we were going to regulate the payday loan industry. People who don't have credit, don't have the ability to get credit from a licensed financial institution, often find themselves in the bind and needing immediate cash, and so they walk into a storefront, they sign a post-dated check for an amount of money. They're handed less money than that check is worth, and then if they don't pay, they can't make that check good, then they walk back in the same storefront, they sign a new one for an even larger amount of money, and it just gets into this horrible cycle for them. And one of the pushes this year was to see if they couldn't limit the number of times those people were subjected to that abuse. And we passed a bill that was supported by the payday loan industry that did not accomplish anything on behalf of those consumers, and it certainly helped the payday loan industry. We passed a bill that provides that if the state is going to hire lawyers, outside lawyers, they have to be these detailed reports and a limitation on how much money they get paid. The limitation is $500 a month. An hour. Yeah, not a month. Goose, even I don't work for that, and I work for free. And no one could. It was a head scratcher for so many people until one of the brighter members of the House decided that they'd look into it. And it seems that all of these pharmacy settlements that the AG has managed to get against Big Pharma because they've been overcharging the state on the formulary. Well, we're paying private attorneys out of Washington, D.C. and New York to do that, and they're charging us much more than $500 an hour. And so, my God, this is not good for us to be paying lawyers out of state all this money to make sure that the state gets money back that those pharmacy companies shouldn't have charged us in the first place. And so we're going to make sure that those abuses of the legal system are reported on. The one part of the debate about Common Core that actually managed to get through the process was whether or not all of the information is going to be collected to further the purposes of Common Core, and that was to judge your students' performance against everybody else in the country, that information was going to remain completely private and would not be used to violate the students' privacy interests. federal law already mandated that, but we made sure that Louisiana law also mandated that. Though we hate most parts of the federal government, we don't hate those parts that we like. And then part of the attempt to claim that we're funding higher education better is the creation of a $40 million fund called the WISE Fund. I don't know, Workforce and Innovation for a Stronger Economy. I'm going to let Albert actually talk to you about what that's going to do for colleges. That won't take up more than 30 seconds of his speech. But in exchange for $750 million in cuts to their direct state funding over the past 5 years, we've given them back $40 million. Those were the hot topics that passed the House. The one that Glenn talked about, the suit on the SLPFA, that's the Southeast Louisiana Flood Protection Authority East, and the temerity they had to sue oil and gas for destroying the coastline of Louisiana, because, my God, oil and gas has paid royalties to the state of Louisiana of billions and billions of dollars, except I never heard anybody explain what a royalty was. I mean, I know a royalty is when you pay somebody for the use of what they already own. And so all that money that oil and gas has paid us for their right to take the oil and gas from below our land that actually belongs to all of us is certainly supposed to recompense us for the damage they did to the land that's on top of, or was on top of all that oil and gas. However, after the bill passed, a professor at Loyola Law School wrote a memo that said, oh, by the way, you know, this bill is likely to also cancel all the government actions against BP for the Macondo well blowout. And maybe you ought not to sign it. The governor canceled the signing ceremony yesterday, but Stephen Wagasbeck, who is the new president of the lobbies, assures us that the governor's going to sign the bill. We don't care what it does to the BP suits, and that's all the time I have. Thank you.
Our next presenter, and whose organization has been with us from the very beginning, 19 years ago, is the Public Affairs Research Council, now headed up by Robert Travis Scott. Please welcome Robert.
Well, thank you, Gene. They raised the amount of money I have to pay on my fishing license. And I just want to get that out of the way right up front. And that will create some kind of new fund that we can sweep to help pay our hospital bills. So we'll see what happens to that. I really have to begin by saying that we all miss John McGinnis. I've done this lunch several years in a row. I noticed lots of familiar faces. I know a lot of you probably knew John. As a lot of people pointed out after he passed away last week, everybody kept saying, oh, I just saw him, I just talked to him, I just met with him. And he really got around. He really touched a lot of people's lives. And I think he really performed such a great service as the role of a journalist in democracy. And that's the thing that we really valued for. He had a very special relationship with PAR, and even wrote a book about PAR, which I would recommend. It's a book that's not only a history of PAR, but also a good little contemporary history, political history of Louisiana. But turning our attention to the legislative session, what a difference $900 million can make. We've talked about the budget in terms of little cuts and little increases here and there, little programs here and there, but really the 2014 legislative session, it ended with a budget that was balanced very conveniently with contrived and borrowed revenue and the further depletion of trust fund resources. It was a harmonious budget discussion, unlike some we've had in the past, but don't mistake peaceful harmony for good fiscal policy. The budget allows spending increases for some government programs, and it also initiating some potentially beneficial streamlining measures, we hope. The legislature made the right move by refusing to balance the operating budget with an expensive loan from the New Orleans Convention Center that would have been, I think, a very poor fiscal move. So I think the legislature did the right thing in not going along with the administration on that. They also refused to launder one-time money through the state's Coastal Restoration and Protection Fund. I think it's a good idea that they backed off of that. Something they've done many years in the past. They decided this time it's not the way we're going to treat the coastal fund. Not only do I think that's more in line with what the Constitution says we should be doing, but it also doesn't leave you another hole in next year's budget. And everybody's watching now, more so than in the past, about how Louisiana is going to be handling its coastal spending. There's a close attention to us from Congress, from the various federal agencies, the courts, various stakeholders around the country, looking to see how we're going to handle our coastal money. So I think it's a good idea that we start treating this fund with a little more integrity. The overall budget for the fiscal year was $24.6 million. I think I said about 3, maybe 3 or 4% less than the current budget year. And that represents a decrease in federal revenue and a little bit of an increase in state general fund spending. But how we really did it was approximately $900 million combination of trust fund depletions, a tax amnesty program, which really just borrows from yourself from the future, a debt defeasance maneuver, lawsuit settlement, fund sweeps. You know, the legislature and the administration managed to find enough revenues to sustain the state spending plan for the fiscal year that begins July 1, mostly through these mechanisms. And the great majority of that money will be unavailable to us for the fiscal year 2016 Budget Balancing Act. And we'll be here talking about a year from now. Now, I'm sure there are going to be fresh windfalls and new sources of one-time money that are going to occur next year, but there are also very likely going to be new expenses that are lurking out there. We've already seen there might be a reckoning with the federal government over the hospital privatization payments. But we had increased spending programs for this year. Glenn outlined some of those. Some of these create more expenses going into the future. So we have a revenue hole. We don't know how quite big it's going to be next year, but we remain out of sync with what we take in for operating revenue and what we take in and what we spend for operating expenses. Now, important progress was made in a few areas. I want to say that I think, remind us that I think the general administration has its eye on the ball on a few things. I've been critical about them about a number of issues here, but I think they've had their eye on the ball in trying to keep state government from growing, especially in terms of employee numbers. That we've seen there was a huge trend in growth of employee numbers over the years, and we've seen that decline. Really good progress was made on state retirement systems and their method of providing cost of living adjustments. And I like we have time later on to tell you a little bit about campaign finance reform and the bill that passed with that. There were no new standards passed in terms of donations or what you could or could not spend on campaign finance reform, but there was a very minor step forward in terms of disclosure. I'd be glad to talk about that more later if you'd like. And our time is up. We'll move on.
As you know, these are very challenging presentations because they're trying to sum up 45 days of, you put in the adjective, of what the legislature did, okay, in 6 minutes. So be sure and write out your questions as we go through this, and you raise your hand, someone will pick them up and bring them up. Next, we have the minority report from Dr. Albert Samuels, who are reporting on minorities and women. Albert? How did they fare?
All right, for the song of bad sitcom, minority report. First of all, I wanted to also acknowledge how important John McGinnis has been for me. You know, when you a new professor, and a lot of times you get handed the class that that nobody else wants. So I was the one, I didn't go to school to teach Louisiana politics, but I was assigned to teach that class my second semester working at Southern University. And so, so you search around how to find a text. And, so it was John McGinnis's works that really, I had been following Louisiana politics just as a citizen. It is his works that really gave me a great foundation. And so I really just credit, him for just his insight, his wit. His books are just page turners. Not only he gets the facts right, but he tells it in such a compelling way that you can't put his books down. And it's been an honor in the last couple times just to actually have to do this with him. And so you're right, he is sorely missed. I just want to mention a few things in the time that I have. It's already been mentioned about there was a lot of fanfare in the early part of the session about this whole payday loan issue. I think Representative Ted James made that a central thing that he tried to accomplish. And after all of the hoopla about that, basically nothing really happened, despite the fact that you had actually a lot of ordinary people, coming to the Capitol and explaining the problems that they had with the payday loans. It turns out that these ordinary people were basically no match for the more organized, well-funded lobbyists of the payday loan industry. And actually, this was a sort of a recurring theme on a number of issues at the Capitol this year. We had a number of instances where you had a lot of ordinary folks coming to the Capitol on a number of issues, and for example, Common Core was a very good example of this, and people who were quite upset about things, and for the most part, they weren't successful. For the most part, they simply were no match for the much more well-organized lobbyists, who were able to beat back their efforts. And this was another example of this, where people came to the Capitol with a lot of energy, a lot of passion, and then they left empty-handed. In Louisiana, because of what the legislature has done, abortions are going to be hard to get in Louisiana. The governor is going to sign one of these, another one of these. I guess you can call it one of these cut and paste conservative bills. I call it with the admitting privileges that's going to be required of abortion clinics, which will effectively close probably about 3 clinics. And you can probably expect that there will be a legal challenge to this, but that could tie to who knows what will happen. This actually could end up in the U.S. Supreme Court. But in the meantime, unless the court stays the implementation of this law, the practical effect of this law will be it will close several clinics, because there will be the clinics who simply are not going to meet the standards of this law, and they want to be forced to close. Our lawmakers, despite the fact that the United States Supreme Court in 2003 ruled that that laws that outlaw sodomy are unconstitutional, our legislature refused to repeal a law that the Supreme Court has said a decade ago is clearly not only is unconstitutional but unenforceable. We had a big stink about this about a year ago when I think it was either Baton Rouge Police or East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriffs, were basically arrested, sexuals in public parks, and then they realized, we can't charge these people because the law won't let us to. Yet, despite the fact, not only was this bill beaten back, it wasn't even close. Because in the Louisiana Family Forum came there and they made several arguments, and that was the end of it. So we still have sodomy laws on the books, despite the fact that they are unconstitutional and unenforceable. Then also, if we look at some other issues that, are not specifically minority or women's issues, but they would disproportionately would have helped or benefited minorities, like the raise of the minimum wage, or the expansion of Medicaid. Neither one of these bills passed, efforts passed. This is not a particular surprise, but actually, what we ended up with, instead of expanding Medicaid, we get this interesting experiment called Bobby Care. That it's really not a plan at all. It's really a set of principles, and at some point we're going to actually find out what the plan is, and we may even find out what it costs. But let's say it just basically passed it and allows them to develop it. But it's not a plan. It's a plan with blank sheets. And they went home and passed it. So, we don't know what the budget implications of any of this will be. We don't even know if the federal government will even let us do it. We just passed it. Also, there are some other issues in which I want to mention real quickly that, again, while they ostensibly are not about race, they really are about race in a lot of ways. At least race is a major subtext and also a major part of the foreground of these issues. Efforts to restructure the East Baton Rouge Parish school system once again failed. It passed the Senate. It passed the House Education Committee, and then it was crushed on the House floor. Now, this bill was an example of what actually happens when people actually figure out what's actually in the bill. A major difference between this bill and what happened 2 years ago with the governor's education reform bill was that it was rushed through the process. They bundled a lot of things together, which of course later said was unconstitutional, and a lot of people didn't even read the bill. And then later you had lawmakers complaining about certain things, and then we said, well, but it's in the bill. You voted for it. And it seemed that on the House floor, as this was being debated, the more legislators understood what was actually in the bill, the less votes this thing got. And by the time it was over with, they only got 31 votes. It was a crushing defeat for the chamber, who had invested a lot of energy in this. But that's what happens when people may actually figure out what's in a bill. It's amazing what can happen. Also, there were several efforts to try to derail the St. George Incorporation effort. They basically failed. In fact, this actually ended up being one of the more farcical spectacles at the end of the session. Because there was a bill to try to put a moratorium on incorporation efforts, and then one by one, various parishes asked for exceptions, and it got to the point where it just got ridiculous, and so the whole effort just kind of collapsed and died, and so I think I'm out of time now. So thank you.
I'm here. Thank you, Albert. And now, at this time, what, John, something's the matter? Okay, can you hear me?
No.
Something's wrong. Albert, what did you do? Okay, thank you. At this time, we'd like to pay tribute to one of our members, John McGinnis. This is the first time in 19 years that he is not with us in person. I know he's here with us in spirit. Each of you, please take our tribute to John home with you. He was a very special friend, a very fair and balanced journalist. And Jeremy, you got some big shoes to fill. And it is with great admiration that I say thank you to Jeremy Alford, his partner, for being willing to not only step in this time, but hopefully to step in and always have a presence of Louisiana politics at the reality check. Jeremy?
I just wanted to say thank you to each and every one of you, and let me tell you why. At home, I have a very strong, independent wife who enjoys telling me what to do, and quite frankly, I love her to do it. I have a 7-year-old girl who has an opinion on everything under the sky. I get a blow-by-blow every afternoon of what happened at daycare. I have an 18-month-year-old son who's just now beginning to talk, more like babbling. Look, this kid says more things about nothing that I'm absolutely certain he is destined to serve in the Louisiana legislature. So when I'm not doing things like this, I'm home with them, and that's all to say thank you for allowing me to speak for more than 5 minutes uninterrupted. What did we learn about the legislature this year? I think once again we were reminded that the legislature is like Novocaine. It takes a little while to kick in, but boy, when it does, you don't know where you're going to wake up, what's going to happen. And that's all to say that the session did not end the way that it started. It started with a bang and it ended with a whimper. And I'm going to give you 3 takeaways, and then I'll tell you what we should look forward to in the next session, and then we'll wrap it up. Number 1, for big oil, it was a yes session. For education, it was a no session. For Governor Jindal, it was a maybe session. Big oil got everything they wanted except for one initiative. If you ever question how much control they have over the pressure points in the political process, look no further than this session. I think both bills will be signed. This story is not over. The bills that were passed this year will end up in the courts. On education, this was a real big surprise to me. The Speaker of the House seemed like he started to hit all the right points and to make education a priority this session. There were nearly 190 bills assigned to the education committees. That's the most in recent memory. And to see how many of them failed. There was a proposal to kind of scale back TOPS. It's such a popular program, though. Nobody want, if they can get their kids a free education, they want to do it, so legislators backed away from that. Common Core was a hot issue. It was very emotional. But so much involvement from the parents, I think lawmakers started second guessing. The governor changed his position on the stance. And also it's a very complex topic. A lawmaker told me that this was the most debated topic of the session that no one understood. The third is the governor. For all the complaining and the harping that the media and the legislature did about the governor not being present this year, about presenting the lightest administration agenda we've seen in 2 terms, they really put a lot of trust in this man towards the end of this session. They're allowing him to cut $71 million from the budget. And look, if I was a legislator and the governor came to me and said, hey, instead of you making the tough decisions, just kick it over to us. So lawmakers took a step back. The governor, of course, is out there running for president. He has a national agenda. He has a nonprofit that came up with these very broad strokes for health care. And the legislature, embraced that. It took a Democrat to make it happen, comically enough. And so there's nothing in this plan. What's going to happen is the governor's health leader is going to go and create a plan to bring it back to legislators in September. So looking forward, what's going to happen with oil and gas? The one lawsuit from the coastal parishes of Jefferson and Orleans, they were not able to move. So what we're going to see is probably that issue is going to sit on the shelf until a new governor is elected. However, for the first time, we're going to see the oil lobby go after parish council seats in those 2 parishes and elsewhere. I mean, of course, they have a stronghold over the legislature and even in some of the federal races, but to see them go on the parish level is just going to be really fun to watch. For education, expect to see all those bills again next year. I think there's going to be a new focus on the minimum foundation funding formula. This is the funding for public schools. And as for the governor, the big question is whether he's going to step it up next year or take a step back. But everybody keep your Novocaine handy, because I got a feeling it's going to be a long, bumpy ride. But to cap this off, I want to tell what was John's favorite joke. And John did have a favorite joke, and I know a few of you, and definitely almost everybody up here, has heard that joke before. And I used to pick on John, and he said, I know people have heard it before, but I love telling it. So I'm gonna tell it, and I'm gonna sit down and we'll answer some questions. Mike Foster, Buddy Romer, and Edwin Edwards all end up in heaven on the same day. They go to the pearly gates, and for whatever reason, the gates don't work. So Buddy Romer tells St. Peter, let me go look. I used to be a contractor. I can figure this out. So Romer goes over and he comes back with a big stack of papers. He goes, here's the receipts, here's it explains all the cost and everything. I'll do it for $1,000. We'll get it up and running. But Foster jumps in. He's like, well, hey, I did some contracting too. So Foster goes and looks and comes back and tells St. Peter, $1,500, we'll take care of it. St. Peter said, why the extra $500? He goes, you pay what you get what you pay for. So by the time Edwards kind of figures out what's going on, and he walks up and goes over to the gate, kind of kicks it a little bit and goes back to St. Peter. Said, I'll take care of that for $3,000. St. Peter said, $3,000? That's 3 times what Romer said. That's twice what Foster. Edwards leans in and says, 1,000 for you, 1,000 for me, and we sub it out to Romer.
And now you know why we're all going to miss John so very, very much. First, I'd like to invite Robert Scott to come back up, and because it's such an important topic, and discuss what he didn't have time to while he was here on campaign finance. It's a topic, an issue that is very dear to leaders with vision. Please, Robert, enlighten us.
Well, thanks, Gene. There's been a lot of media attention on how office holders spend their campaign finance money, and a lot about donations. I know the Times-Picayune NOLA has done a lot of work on it. We've seen some from Jeremy's outfit. The Advocate has really gotten into the game. I don't know how many have been watching all the lurid, wonderful stories coming out of St. Tammany, but we've just had some really entertaining stuff coming out of there. And I think what happened is this session, there was an interest on the part of the legislature in at least taking a look at this and looking at maybe what they could do. Now, as far as anything happening on the donation side, nothing really happened in terms of controlling anything on the donation side or creating more disclosures on the donation side. At least if there were, it was fairly minor. But what you saw was some attention on the expenditure side. And the reason the expenditure side is important is because even though this is private money being given to someone who's running a campaign or someone who's an office holder, if you then take that money and enrich yourself, you are essentially using that campaign donation as a bribe. So we want to try to control that. And I think most legislators are aware of this, and actually I think most legislators probably are doing the right thing. But the law doesn't apply just to them. It applies to all office holders and all campaigners in the state, on the state and local level. So what they ended up discussing was a bill by Representative Tim Burns, and it makes a very modest step on campaign expenditure reporting. It basically says that you have to give a description of the purpose of the campaign expenditure. Now, there's already a spot on the campaign finance form for that, and you could even argue that the ethics board, if it wanted to, could already enforce it to that level and ask for a better description. And it would have been better if the law in the end had said you need to provide a description of how the expenditure relates to the holding of office or running a campaign, but the language in the end just said how the expenditure relates to basically how the expenditure relates to the expenditure, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. However, I will say that this bill, in combination with another bill that was passed, I think will give one notch a little bit better on disclosure. I think it sends a signal out to people who are running for office and in office that they are going to be called upon to put a description of what their expenditure is, and hopefully it'll get some actual attention. The other law that was passed basically says that up to now, if the ethics staff had a question about your campaign finance form, you had to launch a formal investigation to then go and have some interaction with the candidate to find out what was going on. Now this law will allow some of that conversation to take place to help clarify things. So I think a combination, this isn't much. This is a teeny tiny little baby step, and maybe it'll serve as a little bit of a deterrent to some politicians who might want to make some expenditures that they really shouldn't. But it does not change the standards of what you can spend money on and what you can't spend money on. And meanwhile, the Board of Ethics is going to be, we've urged the Board of Ethics to try to produce a list, much the way the Federal Elections Commission and other state jurisdictions do on this, and to try to tell candidates, here's an adequate explanation and here's an inadequate explanation. If you turn in something that says campaign signs, then everybody knows what that is, and that's probably a campaign expenditure. If you turn in something that just says gift, and that's probably not going to do it. We're probably going to need to know a little bit more than that. So amidst all this great media attention and all this great focus on this issue, we have this teeny little bill that maybe will help a little bit. Meanwhile, I would just tell you, if you think campaign finance issues have been an interesting subject up to now, wait till 2015. We are going to see a whole new level of money talking in the state elections. We've got the governor's race, we have all the legislative races, and we're going to see campaigns, we're going to see outside money, we're going to see PAC money. It is going to be the most aggressive campaign finance efforts that you've ever seen. And not all directly to the candidates, but also to the PACs, where we don't have the same kind of disclosure. Not a whole lot's been done, but we certainly are going to be able to give the media more and more chances to do some really great work on this issue.
Thank you very much. And for those of you who have questions, please fill out your cards and raise your hand. John will come pick them up, and we'll start with the first question. Did the legislature provide any remedies for the federal rejection of Louisiana hospital privatization plan? And the follow-up question is, does the legislature have any oversight over this hospital privatization plan? And it's been suggested that this question go to Robert Scott.
I shouldn't go again. Why don't you let somebody else go?
No.
Okay.
Butcher kicked it strictly into your lap.
Okay, the hospital privatization. I think what you had here was a privatization move. PAR did a fairly significant report on this that came out in December. I recommend it to you. I think it's a very balanced look at what has happened. On the positive side, with the hospital privatizations, what we've seen is that we've gotten LSU out of the business of operating hospitals statewide and focusing on its mission of education in the medical field, and that's a good step forward. We've also seen, I think, some results already from some of these areas where we're seeing better health care and a little bit above the type of health care they were getting in terms of a little bit of preventative care that a lot of these people under the old system were not getting. So I think the healthcare standard, and that's important. We tend to look at this hospital privatization strictly as a budget issue and a finance issue, but it's a healthcare issue. And if they're getting better healthcare, that's a positive. Where we have concerns about the privatization mainly is, number one, the long-term finances for this are really in doubt. And the uncompensated care we know is going to be reduced nationwide. We're probably going to take a hit on that. That's a major underpinning. If you looked at the latest letter from CMS to the state, they're raising a lot of questions about the upper payment limit, which has been the form of rescue funds for the state budget for health care for years now. Ingenious program started by Senator Heitmeyer. But the question is how are they going to let that continue to inflate and become such a big factor as it has become in our state healthcare budget. All these things help underpin the healthcare system, and the privatization system in the long run has probably got to find some other way to be funded. It probably can't continue under the same pattern that it has now. That's our main concern about it. And if you talk to people in the hospital industry, they will probably all tell you confidentially that is the case too. They're very concerned about it. And so that's why they have these constitutional amendments coming up in the fall that's going to try to help them out. They wouldn't want me to call it a bed fee, but there's a way that they're going to be able to charge a fee that can get a federal match, and they want to put that in the Constitution. So that's coming up. So the other problem with the privatizations is that each market is very different, and you're going to have to evaluate the privatizations according to each market, because every deal is rather unique. But in some of these communities, you have a partner hospital that is taking over the charity hospital role, and they have a completely different financial model supporting them than the non-partner hospital. The non-partner hospital isn't getting the same rate of reimbursement. And so you're creating some financial strain on the non-partner hospital. So I think in the long run, a lot of legislators started catching on to this session and started vocalizing about it. I think we're going to see probably in the long run some changes in this whole privatization effort. We think, as a privatization, it's been a net plus, but I don't see it as sustainable in the long run. Some changes are going to have to be made. We don't know yet how much the federal government will ask to reconcile with the state. A lot of the attention so far has been placed on concerns about the advance payments that were made by the hospitals and whether or not these measured up to what the federal agency thought were appropriate donations that could be matched with the federal money. And so I think what we're looking at is not just the advance payments. That's certainly concerned about that. It's still not completely clear to us that the overall payment system is not still in some question. And like I said, the upper payment limit system, which is sort of separate from that, but is a major healthcare funding, is also they're raising questions about it. I think there are just a lot of big question marks out there. Now they're going to be able to delay, the administration is going to be able to delay the reckoning on this for a good long while. But at this moment, I think that really to answer the question, we don't know how much it's going to be, and we don't know when the bill is going to come due, but there will be something.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment on that? Well, this one goes to the House and the Senate. How did the Office of Group Benefits go from a $500,000 surplus to a deficit once Bobby sold it to a private company? Anybody else want to take a shot at that?
I can talk a little bit about it.
Where's Bobby?
Well, I think a lot of people can ask that.
I'm not going to go deep on this. The Office of Group Benefits, it was privatized. There was a half of it that was privatized by the general administration, which I happen to think was probably an okay, reform. And the question really becomes, how do you maintain this fund that's built up there? And the way we've been maintaining the fund has not been in the same, say, actuarial standards that we'd use for the rates that are set for the state retirement systems. And that may be a good way to go with this fund, to go in and set those funds. What we ended up with is if you lower the state contribution, lower the rates, you're going to draw more money from the trust fund account, and the same with if you do the opposite, you'll get the reverse. So what we've done is we've had a depletion of the Office of Group Benefits account, and the way I think we need to look at this going forward is to look at the rates we have and try to have a more independent, at least a slightly more independent way of addressing that and setting those rates so that we can keep that fund at an actuarial sound level. Right now, the system we have for setting those rates is really a lot more random and politically motivated.
Thank you. I'm not sure everybody's real happy with that answer, but thank you for the answer, Robert. All right, this goes to Butch. How can a law be passed that is retroactive? How can you change a law after people have acted on the previous law? I.e., I'm sorry, you're going to have to read the last letters on this, I can't.
I told you I could read.
I know that.
I.e. the slip of suit and the parish suits. Well, the first thing everyone needs to remember, keep in mind that governmental entities are not people. And we can take away from governmental entities even those actions that have accrued to them. Now, if you and I had filed those lawsuits, the legislature could not constitutionally go backwards and say, oh, by the way, that suit you filed, we're going to make it go away because you have a property right in that action. But those constitutional protections are not afforded to government. government is not a person, and it doesn't have the protection of the equal protections of laws, or even due process against itself. And so the legislature can go to any parish, any political subdivision, any entity of government and say, you may think you have that right, but we can take it away. And that's why they can do it.
Okay, Butch, then what you're actually saying, is that government agencies that were set up to protect the people are prohibited from protecting the people because government can change its mind politically. Is that correct? Can I sum that up? No. Okay, come back and tell us again.
Well, I didn't say any of that.
I think she was unhappy with my answer.
And this has nothing to do with whether they're protecting your rights, their rights, or the industry's rights. It has to do with constitutional law. And Gene may believe that that is what that means, and it may be part of what it means, but that's not what this is about. The question is about an issue of constitutional law, and that is, can the legislature retroactively take away rights from people? And the answer is no. But they can retroactively take away rights from governmental entities, whether they're pursuing something in good faith that benefits people or whether they're acting in bad faith that harms people. It doesn't really matter. It has to do with the relationship within government as to who has the power, and the legislature has the power. So that's Gene's interpretation of what all that constitutional provision means.
Oh, I get it. Politics over people. All right, the next question is, what do you feel are the underlying reasons for education continuing to take a back seat to the legislative agenda? Albert?
Well, first of all, this is not exactly a new problem in Louisiana. Traditionally in Louisiana, education is always the highest priority in politics after everything else. And we talk a good game about how education is important. Now, and again, it depends on what you mean by the question. Now, certainly in Louisiana, there was a lot of angst about Common Core. There were lots of bills filed about that. You had groups from very different ideological stripes, coming together. You have on one side you got people who who are opposed to it because they think it leads to charters. They're opposed to charters. They see it as a conservative takeover of education. You have other people who think it's a dark Obama communist socialist experiment to try to take over. I mean, it's about that wide, and it was that wide, And they had the only thing they had in common was they were against Common Core. But it was in some way it was a difficult issue in a lot of ways. It's a complicated issue, and oftentimes those who were for it, they had passion, but they without a clearly articulated alternative, the legislature basically ended up doing nothing. Doing nothing. It didn't help. Now, the governor was, as far as Common Core, he was for it before he was against it. In 2010, when nobody was looking, he was all for it. And then when the conservative right of his party decided that it was an Obama conspiracy, then he became against it. But then at the same time, he did. While he was interesting. He preserved his flexibility. Because he was against it, but then he didn't invest too much political capital in trying to make sure it happened. So either way, he come out good. I was against it, but I also didn't risk political capital in trying to actually kill it and then lose. So he sort of preserved his options. So we had a lot of heat. Now there was a lot of course, there was a lot of controversy about the East Baton Rouge Parish and the school systems here. And I think one of the reasons these bills failed is that we had 3 consecutive years of people bringing local issues to the Capitol. And I think after the 3, a lot of us just simply got tired of it, quite frankly. And so I came to the conclusion to look at those are local issues. They should be solved at the local level. And I think with each, it's almost like with each different foray, they got less support each time. And so I would tend to think, but you can always be wrong, that it's unlikely they'll come with the same tactic next time, because given on the last measure, the decisiveness. This is one of those, when you actually look at the vote count, you kind of wondered, they must have not realized that they must have thought it's going to be close going in, because if you come out with only 31 votes, normally you would have pulled the bill if you knew you only had that little support. So it really must have just came apart, in the final hours, as legislators learn more and more about the bill, and just the overwhelming sense that this is, we're tired of you coming up every year with Baton Rouge problems. You guys solved that, and so I don't know. But again, I think that there's just not a new problem in Louisiana of not prioritizing education. But again, we still have not, in my view, made the critical decisions that if you want a first-class educational system, you have to pay for it. And we want all these things, but we don't want to pay for it. And we don't want to figure out how to pay for it. And until actually the people are going to have to demand this of as lawmakers. It's not going to happen. If we're sitting here waiting and expecting for someday for the legislators to somehow reach the light, it's not going to happen. At some point, we're going to have to decide what kind of state we want to live in and what we're willing to do to make that happen. But it's not going to come from lawmakers on their own. It's not going to come from the governor on his own. We see in Louisiana, we sit there waiting for the right governor to come in on a white horse to bring us to this. It's not going to happen.
Thank you. Albert, Glenn, did you have something you'd like to add to that?
Just quickly in defense of the legislature with regard to supporting education. First of all, I think the legislature supports elementary and secondary education as much as they can, and that's pretty clear with the minimum foundation, and we've increased it, and all that money is dedicated, and there's nothing that changes that. And we put a lot of money into that game. But if you're talking about higher education and the cuts that have occurred in that and how much money that colleges and universities have suffered, they've suffered greatly. The reason for that is it's not the legislature's fault. It's the dedications of our state funds that are dedicated in the Constitution, and everybody's got their little pets, and then they come along and they pass something. It's a constitutional amendment that all of us vote on, and we tie it up. I don't know the exact percentage, but I know it's well more than 50% of our general fund is tied up. We can't do a thing about it. So the only places really left to cut is health care and education. That's the only place when we don't have any money left in the general fund. That's the only place that's not dedicated. We're fixing to dedicate some more. We're dedicating some to health care now if you pass the constitutional amendment. So what can be done about that? You got to go back to the people. It's not the legislature. We got a real problem with that. And the only answer to that is to undedicate it, and that's almost an impossibility.
Thank you. And since Albert brought up the concept of priorities, I'd like for you all, and go on record here and now, that the Board of Leaders with Vision has determined its legislative agenda is number one and foremost, citizens' rights, number two, education, and number three, health care. So that everybody in the room understands what this organization considers priorities for the state of Louisiana. We invite you all to join. Now we'll go to the next question. The next question, were any changes made to require property sales and mortgages in Louisiana be registered with the parish clerks of court? Reference, whether the mortgage electronic registration system, MERS, okay, mortgage sales documents must be registered with Louisiana clerks of court. And I guess that is one of our technical questions. Glenn, Butch?
I can't remember. I think we did something on it.
Okay, well, let's leave that one. Can you all get the answer for me, and then we'll post it on our website so this question does not go unanswered. Okay? Were any changes made in procedures for dealing with adjudicated property tax sales?
Why are you looking at me?
Because you survived the session, Butch.
We are 18 hours after final adjournment. I can't tell you what we passed. Nobody can tell you what we passed. I say that every year. Nobody knows what we did.
No, the card. Didn't I see a card come over here? No? Okay. All right. All right, Mr. Scott, I'm not picking on Butch and them, just they survived it. Okay. Question is, did Louisiana citizens survive it? Okay. This one is directed to Mr. Scott. How can it be required that the Office of Conservation, DNR, how can it be required that the Office of Conservation, DNR, when approves a permit for salt mining, etc., be published in media to make citizens aware of risk? The Bayou Corn sinkhole was caused by a permit requested and being approved. You may note that no one has been held accountable. What criteria used, if same used again, could have similar results? Need some method required to shed light on what the state agencies are doing?
I don't know, but I'll be glad to take a look at it.
I'm sorry?
I don't know, but I'll be glad to take a look at it.
It reminds me of, I think it's Albert Einstein who said, if you keep doing the same thing to expect different results, that's called insanity. Are there any further questions?
I can't be anonymous in the case.
Les, you're hard to be anonymous. I mean, Steve, I'm sorry, it's hard for you to be anonymous, period.
I haven't finished writing, I'm sorry.
That's okay, I got some from teachers last month, I couldn't read any of their handwriting.
You won't be able to read this.
Good, give them to her.
Why don't you just say it, Steve? Just ask it.
I don't want to break the protocol.
Okay. What about the
$1.8 billion of
$1.8 billion in tax expenditures? Do we know that we're funding K through 12 to meet expressed goals when
we haven't ascertained the cost of public education?
we haven't ascertained the cost of public education?
The question, Glenn, was relative to,
Steve, come
the question was relative, and it just sparked, it sparked my interest because of the legislature trying to do the right thing in K-12, and the question being hamstrung by constitutional dedications. I'm saying the legislature also has choices, and the governor helps make those, by deciding whether or not we are going to take a serious look ever in Louisiana in regard to what we exempt, what we rebate, what we reduce from the income that we supposedly take in, which is, I think, has been a logical dodge, is my opinion. And the second piece is, speaking to the legislative body about the cost of public education, is having an uninformed conversation, because the state of Louisiana has never done anything to ascertain what the cost is to educate one child.
And this is from memory, and I read a lot of stuff every day during session, Butch and I do. But I believe yesterday, or toward the end of the session, we passed a resolution directing Department of Education, and there was a second group within education to do exactly that, to do a study on the results and the cost per child of education across the state, to see how minimum foundation funding, the amount we provide for funding at the various parishes across the state, and how that funding relates to what is actually happening in the education environment with each child. So, and it's, I think the thing was graded at different levels, different grade levels. I know we passed some resolution to direct them to do that study.
Thank you. All right, I think that's all of the questions. Are there any other questions in the audience? If not, would you please give a warm round of applause to our presenters? And here and now, I'd like to invite you all to return next year. You actually have a greater impact than is evidenced in this room, because this also will be up for the public to see from the border to border of Louisiana, and we deeply appreciate your contributions. Jeremy, is there anything last you'd like to say?
No, I think you wrapped it up nicely.
Thank you so much, everybody. Please consider joining Leaders with Vision, and remember, our next meeting will be in the third Thursday in August. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful summer. I didn't realize.